Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. I'm Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free. And tonight we are going to get into it about technology in the classroom. I'm here with Vernon Wright, and technology is one of his specialties. K to 12 schools. He's known to, you know, uh, add some value here or there for the kids. And if you can't tell, he's from the great state of Texas. What's going on, Vernon?
Indeed. Well, first of all, thank you all for allowing me to be in the thought space with you. To everyone who is here, whether someone referred you to be here in the space or whether you are already a loyal follower, of which you have many, it is my honor and my pleasure to be in the thought space with you all this evening. And for me, very honored and blessed and grateful to have been on a few different podcasts before. And so, one of the things that I hold myself to as a standard or an outcome of success for me is whether I'm able to go ahead and give people something to think about and to give them maybe what you would see as some thought tools to help you all be better. And of course, as I'm sharing with you all teach me as well. Always a lifelong learner. So, thank you, thank you from the great state of Texas.
All right, well, I appreciate that. What a wonderful way to start off tonight, just taking some time to appreciate where we are and what we're doing here. And of course, I expect nonetheless, we've done this a few times in the past. It's been a while, but I certainly remember. And it's actually been a while for me since I've been in the classroom. We're coming up almost on 3 years since, that whole mandate madness down in New York City.
Right?
And I've sort of rebuilt my life around working from home, making content, doing some
Mhm.
child advocacy, and I homeschool my son now. And so I read things, I hear things about what goes on in the schools, and I've been seeing a lot of talk about banning cell phones from classes. And I know a lot more parents are worried these days
Mhm.
about data. And I know you're a technology guy in the school. So I said, who better to consult on this issue than you? And so just give me the overall landscape right now. What's it like in schools since after the shutdowns, now everybody has devices, people on computers, I would imagine more than ever, or what are you seeing out there in terms of technology in K to 12 schools and how it's been impacted since post pandemic?
Yeah, well, great question. And again, thank you all so much for having me here. I'm honored to have been a speaker in different spaces in different parts of the country and to have worked with different people in K through 12 education, but also too as well, which some of your audience followers or listeners may not know. I am also too involved in collegiate learning, and so I am the proud vice president of the Alumni Association of the Board of Directors at my undergraduate alma mater. And then, of course, do some work with my graduate alma mater as well. So, very, very blessed to have seen a lot of different perspectives. So, for those that are following along or those that maybe have seen us in the dialogue space before, but obviously, for your loyal followers, you know better than to come into the podcast space without something to write notes with or on because it's getting ready to start right now.
All right, let them
All
know. Let
right,
them know.
here
Okay.
we go. Here we go. So, few things for you all to think about to really kind of guide your thinking, really for all of us. And so, the first thing I want to start out with is really kind of a bonus, and it's one that I ask different groups to think about as a word whenever I go to different places to speak, and that includes um, spaces that are not really education spaces. Okay. So that first word is community. What does community mean? So I want everyone to think about that. What does community mean to you? What does it mean to me? And so one of the things that I often share with people when I share that or I ask that question is that we typically think of community as being those that are in geographical proximity to us. Okay. Somebody that you say would be a local or a local to me. But I also say this that community can be not only people that have shared values and are in shared spaces, but People that want to come together around one common thing. Just one common thing is all it takes. Wow, Vernon, just one thing? Yes, just one thing. And that one thing is this: the desire to learn more. Simply it. The desire to learn more doesn't necessarily mean that we always have to agree on every single point or on every single thing. There might be a lot of things that we disagree on. But what unites us and brings us together? The desire to learn more. And we are all lifelong learners. I often tell people that if you meet someone who says that they know everything, politely say thank you, turn around, and run away quickly. So, what I have seen in the different spaces and different places that I have been at is much so, like you have said, really this focus on cell phones. And really implicit within that, this concern, we'll call it a concern, that cell phones or other electronic devices somehow distract from, detract from, take away from, diminish whatever the learning environment is. Okay. So that's kind of a basic premise. I would think people would go ahead and echo that both in
Yes, I
urban spaces.
agree with that premise.
Yes, both in urban spaces and in rural spaces as well, and of course, suburban spaces. So, one thing I want to ask folks to think about is this. And again, if you're ready to take notes, this is a great place to take notes. To quote the great Dr. Stephen Covey, and it's simply this: keep the main thing the main thing. That's number one. Keep the main thing the main thing. So, if you're taking notes, Dr. Stephen Covey, keep the main thing the main thing. The second thing I want to go ahead and give you to think about as we kind of matriculate and kind of navigate through this dialogue this evening. And again, thank you so much for having me on here with your audience. Is the word honor, HONOR, the word honor. Okay, the word honor. And so when we talk about the word honor, I like using the word honor because honor is so descriptive. It really brings it down to this understanding of what does it mean to honor something. So as we go through this tonight, I want you all to think about, how do we honor learning? But then obviously too, what do we use cell phone devices for? Primarily communication. We use them for entertainment and games, things like that. But the primary reason we have cell phones is for communication. So how do we honor learning at its highest level? But then also too, how do we also honor our ability to communicate with other human beings? Okay. One more thing. Those that have followed me for years, you know that I often use these three words: connect, impact, scale. How can we come together as human beings, whether learning is in a formal, structured environment like a school or building or some other type of university or building or structure? It can happen anywhere. How do we connect with each other while we are in the process of learning? Impact. How do we help someone else be better? And obviously, too, as well, how do they help us be better? Because that symbiotic relationship should be happening. And then the third thing is scale. How do we reach as many people as possible to help their lives be better, the quality of their lives? So, just a few things right there before we get started to lay the groundwork. And again, thank you for letting me be in the space.
Okay, so I guess you're sort of like disagreeing with the premise of cell phones don't have a place in the classroom, and you're saying, well, hold on there, before we just blanket ban them, let's consider these three aspects. You said community, honor, and connect, share, and scale. I think was the last one.
Connect, impact, scale. Yeah.
Pack
So
scale.
honor, absolutely so. And then, of course, the first question, and I had a mentor share this with me years ago. And of course, he's certainly not the person that coined it, but it's impactful and made an indelible impression upon me. Hence the reason why I'm sharing it with you all here in the show. And simply, it's this, and I'm paraphrasing. He said, "You know what, Vernon? If you ask the right questions, you get the right answers." Okay. If you ask the right questions, you get the right answers. So I would say to anyone out there who is wondering, professionally or just in their personal lives, what's an area that there would be a high leverage area that they could really focus on and really go to the next level with, that would provide a really high rate of return in terms of time, effort, and energy, it would be questioning and learning about different types of questions and how those different types of questions can usher the executive functioning, usher us into leveraging that executive functioning in our minds. So that's the reason why I started out with that statement of keep the main thing the main thing. Well, what is the main thing in learning? It is to learn, right? Now, what is learning? How could we define learning? Well, learning, simply, I say, I'm a person that likes for things to be rather simple, because I have found over the years that if things are complicated for people, including myself, we might not necessarily be able to implement those things as well. So I just like to go ahead and keep things simple. So I've always looked at learning, teaching, that whole process, whether that's in a building or not, it can happen anywhere, is being the transference of an idea from one person to another. I know about something, you don't. I talk to you about it. I transfer that knowledge to you. Learning has taken place. I don't know about something, which would be podcast hosting, of which you do a great job. I don't know about a lot about podcast hosting. You tell me a few things, I learn, learning has taken place. So that's always the number one thing. So if that's the number one thing, again, here's a rhetorical question. Great place to take notes. Is there anything involved in the midst of the learning experience that detracts from, in some way, potentially diminishes the level of learning that can take place in that space? Now,
Okay.
sure,
So, and this is still in pertaining to being a phone, right? Like the phone in the
sure,
classroom. So,
the phone or any other type of device, but
okay, okay.
primarily a phone.
So can you give me like a specific way in which that you think is appropriate use for whether it be a phone or a tablet, or give me your picture of what a classroom would look like, and let's define the different levels, right? Like give me a little picture for an elementary school, give me a little picture for a middle school, give me a little picture for a high school.
Yeah.
What you think would be the appropriate way for those different levels to use technology, and what the appropriate technology use in those spaces are for those age groups.
Right, very good. So I'll just keep it very, again, very, very, very simple. When someone's learning something, when we are all learning something, if someone is a good teacher or a good instructor, okay, and you all, of course, have gone through learning, all of us have at different points in our lives, whether that's something that's personal, whether it's something that's professional. At some point in time, that instructor is going to stop and ask you, do you understand? Is there anything that's not clear? What might the instructor also do? They might go ahead and give you a little pop quiz. Now, we would call that a what? For those that are into
A formative assessment.
curriculum
I
and
can
assessment.
remember a thing or two.
Yeah, we would call that a formative assessment, right? So, again, why would we go ahead and do that? Why does an instructor do that? Because one of the things a great instructor wants to do in whatever realm of life it is they want to make sure that along the way, you are grasping what they're sharing. Now, let me go ahead and say this and make a connection. We might have some folks out there that are chefs or bakers. I am really not one, but I think it's a great example, which is simply this. How many folks that are expert bakers and chefs and cooks, even those that are not, that are still pretty good? How many times, again, a rhetorical question, have you tasted something as you're making it? That's a formative assessment. Why would you not do that and then wait to the very end and then say, okay, well, let me go ahead and taste it? The reason why simply is this. When we're developing and we're creating something and we're learning, that is a process. You'll hear people often say, don't focus on the destination, but focus on the journey. So as we're focusing on that journey and we're progressing through that journey, what are we doing? We're living in that moment. And so that journey is a series of what? It's a series of moments. So as we're in those moments where we are learning, We want to go ahead and be able to have the opportunity to demonstrate our learning. But then our instructor is going to want to know what? Do they know the learning? Because what is learning? Again, very simple definition. One person tells another person something that they didn't know before. Okay. So at an elementary level, that might be a tablet device, very simple input, very easy because the focus, and let me say this again, great place to take notes. The focus is not on the technology. The focus should be on how does the technology enhance the learning. And I want to say this for some folks that maybe have been in this spot before. Again, not a technology expert, just sharing of my experiences over what now is 2 decades. Okay. And it's simply this: when we think about technology, we sometimes become, and I'm guilty, I hold my hand up, we sometimes become so enamored with the technology that we really lose sight of what we're trying to do, which is learn. And that's why I said before, keep the main thing the main thing. Now, so you go to maybe, let's say, a junior high or a middle school level, maybe the devices are a little bit more advanced. You go to the high school level, maybe they're a little bit more advanced. You go to the collegiate level, post secondary education. You go to that level, and maybe the devices, pardon me, are even more advanced. But regardless of what level or to what degree the devices are in terms of their technical prowess, again, what is the main thing? One person sharing knowledge with another person, does the other person understand? If they don't, we have to go back over that process again. Now, here's where cell phones come in, or any other devices that would be in that learning environment. If there's some type of cell phone device or other device that distracts from, diverts attention away from, interferes with somehow, some way the learning process, that's something that we have to stop and we have to look at. And the reason why I say that is this, and I'm not anti cell phone, definitely not. But what I'm going to say is this, and again, going back to that first question I shared with your audience, or really the first statement, keep the main thing from Dr. Stephen Covey. So if the main thing is learning and something's taking away from that learning, to me, that's really not necessarily any different in that context than people having a sidebar conversation during the learning that doesn't have
Right.
anything to do with the
Okay.
learning.
I think the cell phone maybe has a higher propensity though for those types of things because you can hide it. It just takes one person. You don't need the person next to you. I think that the cell phone, I mean, I don't think elementary school kids should have a cell phone, so I don't think that I don't imagine them being as big of a problem, but certainly in high school, and I
Mhm.
would imagine also in middle school, they've become more of a problem where it's pulling you away from the purpose of the learning, of that journey of learning, of honoring the learning because you're working out of a textbook or you're working with on a worksheet or whatever it is, and the cell phone really isn't pertinent to the lesson. Um, I, I think that they can add value if you're doing a research
Mhm.
paper, or you're writing, or I know when I was in elementary school, we took like Microsoft Word class and we would have
Uh-huh.
to learn how to use each of the different programs.
Right.
But a lot of times it just seems like they're pervasive in every way and there hasn't been good rules around them. So I'm definitely a proponent of at my school when I worked in high school, we did have a system. It was optional, but if you were basically having your cell phone all over the place, you were forced to do it. So students would come in the morning and we had carts and they had a little box with their name on it. They'd put their phone in the box and then they'd leave it there for the day and they'd pick it up at the end of the day. And to me, when that was enforced and something that is, especially like if kids choose to do it, like they're responsible. It's the kids who like trying to sneak the phone in and always, you gotta stay on. But I definitely think it makes all the difference when kids aren't distracted by the phones. I think that also there's like an addictive quality to the phones or the school
Mhm.
screens just in general that
Mhm.
sometimes I don't think that the learning is as deep or meaningful as when you're doing it with paper and pen. So those are some of my ways that I think should also be included in this analysis of, do we need the technology, right? Can it be done without the technology, right? It's
Yeah, so you bring up so many different things. I mean, that's what you shared is so rich, so many different things. But we could be on here for like 3 hours discussing all the different things because it's so rich what you said. I do want to ask, in the midst of just great dialogue, and again, what an honor to be here on your show again. Always, I leave with great things to think about, which is simply this. And again, a question for us all rhetorically: have we all learned how to integrate our own personal technology into our learning so that our learning is honored truly and it's not diminished from? Because I think what happens, and again, just sharing from my experience over the years, having been a speaker in different places, at different conferences and different things, and having talked to a lot of different people, even outside of education per se, is I have traveled as a speaker. One of the things that I have learned is that, again, people have been challenged with how to go ahead and still pay attention to their personal technology, but then also to at the same time make sure that they're learning at the highest level. So, what I say is, let's help people really come to that place where they're able to manage that in real time and obviously still do what? Honor learning at its highest level, but then also to honor their ability to communicate with other human beings. Now, let's also go ahead and acknowledge what has happened with technology. I remember, as someone who's a little bit more seasoned than yourself, I remember back when cell phones were voice only. That's all you did with a cell phone was you need to have a conversation with someone. You called them. That's what it was. And then I remember when the advent of texting came into play, and you could text someone a message, and they could text you back. And then that was interesting. And then one of the actual things that was a monumental in technology that really was a shift, it was a paradigm shifter, was the creation of the first iPhone. And so you had this situation where not only did you have this device that had been used to talk to other people, voice calls, and not only send text to other people and to receive text, but we had this thing then called an app, an app. And I remember those commercials back then from those days with Apple where they used to ask a question about was there some type of aid to go ahead and help out with some type of function you wanted to accomplish, information you wanted to find, reservations maybe you needed to have booked. And the commercial said, and I'm paraphrasing, there's an app for that.
I remember those ones. There's an app for that. There's an
There's an app for that, right? So here you have this device that just doesn't isn't just regulated to voice calls and texting. Literally, there's an app for almost everything that you want to do. So now you have this situation where technology and education maybe haven't necessarily grown together. Maybe they have grown kind of separately in maybe a siloed type of manner. So you have this individual who has this phone, which really is like a little supercomputer in their
yeah, like a
pocket,
portal.
right? Or in their purse or backpack or what
Yeah.
have you. And it has this literally this whole world in this little device. And here this person is that has integrated this so much into their life. They check the weather. They check their bank accounts. They check their email. They play games on it. They do everything on this device. They check their reservations for dinner or for lunch. They check their the status of their airplane flights, and then you're asking them, please go ahead and make sure that you pay full attention. Now to the learning. Also, to another thing, subtle but very significant, are or is this category called notifications. And some people with notifications, they have them turned on. I remember many, many, many years ago, I was sitting in a meeting, and it was pretty quiet. Everybody's very focused, very intensely focused, and all of a sudden, all that you hear is doo 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 doo, which is the ESPN uh, kind of sound for those that are sports fans. And so we all turned and looked at this guy that had it, and we were like, "So who got traded? What's the big news in sports?" So these notifications are on these apps to let you know what's happening, which is great. But then, too, at the same time, again, first question that we asked, really the first statement, which is keep the main thing the main thing. The question then becomes, do these notifications and these other things, do they take away from the learning experience? The other question I have, which is a question I often come to, often or come back to often to really reflect on and to think about, because we're all learning together, which is simply this. Is it possible, whether it's a student, someone in K through 12 student, whether it's someone in college, whether it's an adult that is not in college, that is beyond what would be their typical college years, is it possible to have your device and be looking at your cell phone and looking at the different things and different notifications on your cell phone, and at the same time be 100% engaged in the learning? That question I ask you, ma'am.
I mean, I can't really do that now as an adult, you know?
Right.
Like, and that's what I
Right.
sort of think of. So I was like 19, 20 when the phones started really getting good with the screens and everything,
Right.
and being able to go on the internet and search things and
Hmm.
actually have data to do so. So, when it first came out, you never had data or you didn't have good
This
enough
is
service, it
correct.
took forever to load,
This is
but, like, it
correct.
started getting pretty good, like, 2009, 2010, and I think that's, like, the appropriate age to start figuring out how to use something like that in your life.
Hmm.
And I could see high schoolers having some version of a phone too, and starting to figure out that balance. But I really think these things are so powerful, and can they be used to learn some of the basics? Yeah, they could, but people been learning to read and write and communicate, and I would argue a whole heck of a lot better than we're doing right now. Before
Right.
these devices were so ubiquitous.
Hmm.
And I do think there is something about the developing brain and the screen and the blue lights and the addictive
Absolutely.
qualities of these things. Because
Absolutely.
even if you're playing or not playing, even if you're doing an application that's not gamified, it's just
Hmm.
something like Khan Academy.
Right.
It has these little dings and these little, like, scales that they create this sort of like, they give you little dopamine hits the whole time
Yes.
that
Yes.
you don't necessarily really have to do anything to get. It's like a little hit that comes from the screen,
Hmm.
whereas I feel like when you're in more of an organic learning environment, you more organically create those dopamine hits, and, like, you're, like, proud of yourself because you accomplished something, not because the computer told you you did a great job. And so I feel like we need to, like, create a really solid organic base before we go so heavy injecting the technology in to our kids. Like, we really should look at it like like a drug or like alcohol, right? Like it's okay for adults to like do, like to drink or to smoke and, because they understand the choices that they're making and how it can maybe be beneficial to their life in I mean, obviously you don't want to drink too much, even if you're like into it. It's not healthy for you, but there can be a moderate amount that you drink. Sure, fine, or whatever, different types of drugs, medicinal and recreational, if you because you now have the brain development to make those choices. I really think that we should think about technology more along those lines, especially when it comes to children and schools.
Yeah, that's the executive functioning part of the brain. Certainly not a brain surgeon or neurologist, but
Yes, you saw my really accurate
right.
explanation over here.
Certainly not. And you're always a blessing to me in terms of the different ideas that you bring forward to help us all learn together. And, one of the things you share so many different things there that are so good, is really this acknowledgement that even adults are challenged. Many adults are challenged with, here's this device. I've got notifications going on. I've got all this other stuff going on, and I'm trying to learn something that's very important. So, question for folks, again, a rhetorical question for you to think about. Adults learn to some degree how to self-regulate in these environments, and whether they use the verbiage of quote unquote honoring their learning and honoring their ability to communicate through technology, whether they use that or not, you will see them actually practice this and live this out. So again, something for you to think about: how many times have you been in a meeting or some type of learning session with an adult, okay, or group of adults, and they have their cell phone out, and their cell phone is just going, beep, beep, buzz, buzz, and all this other stuff. Notifications are going on. And how many times have you seen them, as they're trying to learn something that's very important, take the phone and turn it over? Okay. Now, when a person does that, and again, not an expert, just sharing of my experiences that I've seen before. When a person does that, when an adult does that in a situation where they're trying to learn some information and grasp some information, what they are doing is that is a visible symbol to everyone that is looking that whatever is on my phone, it's not as important as the information I'm trying to learn at this moment. So the next time you see someone, if you're in a meeting or something like that, and you see someone take their phone, they're looking at their phone, and then they take it and they put it face down, that's them saying to themselves, let me pay attention. Now, with some exceptions, typically when adults are in learning spaces, they have their technology with them. So what are they managing simultaneously or concurrently? They're managing their technology, or as a tech specialist said to me many, many years ago, I asked them, how do you talk to adults about technology? And this has been some time ago, before, even before technology advanced to where it is now. And the person had a cute saying. They said, we tell them to tame their technology. And I said, okay. So you have that person that's in that space with this technology, and then they're also trying to learn. Well, what did they do? What they learned that worked for them in their self-regulation is to take the phone and turn it over. So when you see an adult do that, that's a visible sign. Now, for someone else, they may not necessarily have to turn their phone over. They may not necessarily have to even do anything different. They may just be able to say, you know what? Let me go ahead and pay attention to what's being said. Whatever's on my phone, I'll get back to my phone later. Okay. Now, going back to something you just said a few moments ago, what are those things? What are those decisions, or where are those decisions coming from? They're coming from the executive functioning part of the brain. Now, you may have the statistics on it. I don't, but I believe that somewhere in the 20s, early to mid 20s, the frontal lobe of the brain is fully developed. Is that correct? I believe.
Yes,
Uh,
it varies from women to men. I think that we
okay.
hit our full development a little bit before you guys. You're a little slow. I mean, you know, just saying. But yeah. I mean, it's upper teens into the 20s, from varied from person to person.
Right. So then, in situations like that, where as adults, we're able to say in real time, hey, to ourselves, right? Hey, whatever's going on my phone or whatever the situation is, unless it's an emergency right now that I need to tend to, I need to. We do that as adults. And again, what is that? Where does that decision making come from? It comes from the executive functioning part of the brain. So then you kind of reverse engineer that, or you kind of backtrack with that, and then you start to ask yourself some of the questions. One question, which would be, at what age should we be teaching students about executive functioning? And at what age are they able to demonstrate effective executive functioning of the brain? What does that mean, Vernon? In other words, if you have your technology out, do you have the ability, in terms of your executive functioning, because that's where critical thinking and decision making comes from, do you have the ability to say, you know what, let me put this phone up because I need to pay attention to what's being said? Now, when people don't have that ability to go ahead and exercise that type of executive functioning, what happens? Again, what's one of the first things that I shared with your great audience here that is with us? The word honor. So when we're not able to go ahead and really come from a place with great executive functioning and to make a quality decision, what is hurt by that? The learning experience, the learning environment, because we're not able to honor that. Well, why are we not able to honor it? It doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to honor the learning experience. We all do. We're just not at the level of having the capacity to honor the learning and manage our cell phone device. And so that's why there's I feel, and again, lifelong learner, just a person who's trying to learn, a person who's trying to understand, who has seen things again over 2 decades. That's one of the reasons I believe there's always been this great conflict between cell phone devices and the learning environment, because things that are happening in the learning environment, those that are sharing that content and that information with those who are trying to learn that, they want their full attention, as anyone would typically as an instructor. You want somebody's full attention, you know? So if the people that are learning, again, whether they're students or whether they're adults, if they're not able to go ahead and devote their full attention, and let's just say the cell phone is the reason for that, the cell phone's interfering with their learning process, then the question comes up in real time, what is this person paying attention to? Well, they're typically paying attention to whatever it is that's happening on the cell phone versus what's happening in the learning environment. And so that's really where this issue comes from. One of the things I think about, and I'll share this very briefly, is really kind of one of the things you touched on, and it's really about adults with their technology in a learning environment. Again, some exceptions out there, so I don't want to say that there are no exceptions. Some exceptions out there. I issue that caveat before I say this. Often adults have their technology with them, and are sometimes even looking at it when they're in a learning environment, actively learning information about something that they need, whether that's professional or whether that's personal, and something that might not even be related to what they're learning about. So if adults are able to do that, how can we go ahead and get students or even people who are not developed in that executive functioning to that place where they can manage both? Because what's the other option typically in real time? Someone tries to take a cell phone.
Right. I guess in the classroom, like it can lead to conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, there would be some sort of protocol um, that you could go through to get somebody to handle that. But no, for sure, I think that there's definitely like when schools start implementing bans on things or certain disciplinary measures, they only work as well as you follow through with them and people understand what they are, and you have both the teachers understanding of them and the students understanding of what the expectations are. I think that's a big thing. I know with my son, that's how technology is here, is that he understands very clearly what the expectations are around its use. Like he knows that we don't watch TV in
Hmm.
the morning, like in on the weekends, that during the weekdays. On weekdays, we don't watch the TV in the morning. He knows not even to ask me. And I can get him to think about what type, what are you watching on the TV? Like, are you just like going through a bunch of YouTube shorts, or, watching silly
Hmm.
videos of other people playing video games, or, like, what is the purpose of watching this thing? Um, and then also just how much time you're on it, how you feel after you've been on it for so long.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it's a little hard when your kid is like 8 years old. I don't know exactly what the window frame is, but I would say they'll pretty much sit around all day in their underwear eating junk food, playing as much video games as they can. Like, I just don't think that they have that executive functioning. They're doing so many other things. They're growing. They're
Hmm.
have all these social things going on, and that's why they need parents. They need parents there to sort of be that fill gap, and I think that we need to do a better job as parents. I have some videos about how we do like a technology detox. It really helps to just like reset, and also reset the expectations, and who's like in control of the technology, right? Like,
Hmm.
sometimes we get a little bit, hey, I am into work, or I'm doing something, I'm on a
Hmm.
project where
Hmm.
aren't as together as they usually are, and I let him watch too much TV, and then he thinks suddenly he gets to set the rules on the TV. So we got to reset that real quick, and put things back into their places. Because I mean, kids, after they get off that screen, I can see it, or like playing those intense video games, like
Hmm.
they can be amped up, like they can be like
Yes.
their mind can be in a different.
Yes. Because
Um,
that's an adrenaline rush. That's
yeah,
there are a lot of senses that are being activated, a lot of sensory stuff that's happening, especially those more involved games. There's a lot of stuff happening. So the brain really doesn't necessarily know the difference per se between something that's on a screen and maybe something that's necessarily happening in real life to some degree. Obviously, we know the difference between what's on the
right.
screen
And
and what's
they're
happening in
younger,
real
so
life.
they already have like a thinner reality between what their
Right. So,
imagination is doing in the world.
right. So, the point is there's a lot of sensory activity happening. And so when you have all of that sensory activity happening and then you just stop, your brain is still amped up. You're still wired up because when your brain is activated at that level, and again, by no means am I an expert, just sharing of things that I've seen over 2 decades. When your brain is wired like that and it's real amped up, and I'm a gamer myself. I have been for many, many years. I had an Atari 2600 for those that are old school gamers.
Okay.
I had one of those way back in the day.
I got the old Nintendo behind me, you can see on the shelf there.
There you go. Yes, I see that. The Super NES right there. That was the original Donkey Kong. I
Hey.
remember that. So I say this, as a gamer myself as well, and have been for years. When you come out of that situation where you've been involved in really intense gaming, especially if you're trying to make it to the next level and you keep trying to make it to the next level, and the next level, and the next level, that's very intense cognitively. And so sometimes when things are very intense cognitively, our body also has a physiological response uh, beyond the cognitive piece. So when you come out of that, how many times have you heard somebody say after they've done something really intense cognitively, they say, "You know what, man, my head just hurts."
Yeah,
Uh,
like, you wind up getting blue light glasses because staring at the screen. I think that has
right?
to work.
Absolutely. So we have to, again, we have to learn how to balance and how to integrate all of these things together, because I think what some people have said is some people have said, well, we're just going to take all of these things away. And you could do that. There's a place for that, maybe as something to consider. But then at the same time, too, what do we often say, just people in general? We want for kids and people to grow, young people to grow up to be what? Well adjusted to operating in a global society. Okay. To being able to be effective and efficient, and to be able to be a critical thinker and to do all of these really cool things. Well, technology is involved in that. But like a mentor shared with me many, many, many years ago, and a great man, he shared with me, he said, you know what, Vernon, he said, a lot of times in life, whether something's personal or professional, he said, it's not necessarily about being in the ditch or off the side of the road on the left or off the side of the road on the right. He said, a lot of times it's about being just right in the center. And I feel like sometimes we say it has to be all learning. And there's a whole camp around that. All learning, and I'm going to use a little bit of hyperbole here, chalkboards and chalk, and that's it. Okay. And then I feel like we have this other camp over here that's like, you know what? We're going to gamify everything. Everything's gamified. Like even when you take attendance, it's gamified. Everything's gamified, you know.
Gamified on the blockchain, Web3,
Right.
like
Everything's gamified, right?
yeah.
And so, and again, this is another topic, certainly not our focus, but I do feel as though I probably should touch on this, or else I would be remiss if I didn't do that. And it's really this topic and this subject of AI. And people have asked, well, you know, is AI going to replace human beings? And is AI going to do this? And you really touched on it a few moments ago. And AI is a tool and it helps us. But I don't see AI substituting for, supplanting that thing where two human beings come together and one human being says, let me share this information with you that I found out in my life that was really cool with me, that made a difference in my life. Let me share that with you. And the other human being says, wow, that's really cool. Here's something that really made a difference in my life. I want to share that information with you. And so you have these two people that share this information in really this organic way, like you just said, and this thing called learning happens. Like I don't see AI supplanting that. I see AI very much so, because it already has, having a place where it helps to assist in that, it helps to aid in that. But I don't necessarily see anything taking the place of two human beings connecting, or a group of people connecting in community around learning so that they can have an impact on each other, and then expanding that to scale so they can help other people experience that same quality learning experience that changes lives. And so for me, again, going back to your premise before originally, and again, thank you so much for having me on your show, really about cell phones and technology, I say this: I don't want to do away with cell phones because I have one myself. So I don't want to do away with that. But I also, too, at the same time, I want to honor learning. Why do I want to honor learning? Because learning is how we advance. That's how we advance as humanity. Whether I was thinking about this the other day, I drove past a car that I had many years ago, and that particular car has a 6-speed manual transmission. And there's some folks out there that may not know what a manual transmission is, but I had to learn many, many years ago as a young man how to drive that, how to drive a car with a manual transmission, how to learn what a clutch is, how to let the clutch out, how to shift as you're letting the clutch out, and all of that, and how to push on the accelerator, and really what the sequence was of that. I had to learn that. Why? Because that is advancement in life. And so as human beings, and I don't mean to get esoteric, because certainly I'm just an average guy trying to learn. is this: I don't necessarily know how any person can advance in life and not learn something and not be a learner.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have that learner's mindset. As you said, there's well, you said run if somebody thinks that they know everything or they're smartest
Yes.
person in the room.
Run quickly, apologize, thank them first, and say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and then turn around slowly and then sprint.
Yes, yes. So there's always, going to be those people, but I certainly think here on this channel we got a bunch of open-minded, liberty-loving folks here. So I guess I'm inclined to agree with you on the AI portion of it. I don't think that people will be replaced by AI, especially not these algorithms. Maybe there'll be more competition in the workplace in certain ways, but two, I think that it'll transfer to other areas and people have to create the AI, they have to take care of them. And yeah, I don't think that it replaces. I am a little bit more worried about things like the blockchain and the ledger and how much that in particular is hooked up to education technology, and the fact that a lot of education technology was directly developed by the military, and a lot of for things that you are kind of nefarious uses, I guess you could say, or questionable people developing them. And there's a lot of public private partnerships and all sorts of ways that they want to track and trace kids. So I guess even more so than the actual detrimental u- um potential detrimental effects of using the technology and how it may interfere with learning. Maybe it enhances it in some places as well. I'm worried about what's happening on the back end. I'm worried about all the data. I'm worried
Mhm.
about companies that are allowed to get the contracts and get all of our kids' information and where that goes, and how it does feed into the AI and things like that. So I don't know if you have anything in terms of data, how much you know about that stuff, or what your thoughts
Mhm.
are in that aspect of technology in the schools.
Yeah, I will say this. Certainly not an expert on that, but I do want to share something that really is a great thing to think about after what you just shared, and it's really this. Again, what is the essence of learning? What is that? And
I don't know. I usually like to do it without big corporations tracking my data.
right, right. So when you think about what the essence of learning is, I often ask this rhetorical question, and again, it's something for every person to think about. Is there anything that can take away, detract from, diminish that learning experience? So whether that's a data collection piece, whether that's something else, anything that can detract from that learning. Because what is one of the first words that I shared with your audience? It's the word honor, HONOR. And so when we think about honoring the learning process, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about being totally focused and totally engaged in whatever that learning is without worrying about is something happening on the back end over here or is something happening on the back end over there. So I often ask people this, and it's a question I ask myself often too, is what is the essence of learning? Again, I like for things to be pretty simple because I found out that if things are pretty simple for people to understand, people will walk away with some great information. So again, if there's anything, whether that's something on the front end, whether that's something in the middle of the experience, such as like a cell phone or something else that would be competing for someone's attention, whether that is a youth, a young person, or whether that's an adult learner, or whether it's something on the back end, anything that can take away from the learning experience, I think it's something that we all need to come together and collectively ask the question: whatever this thing is this in any way diminishing from this thing that we call learning? Is it optimizing, or a different way to ask it, is it optimizing the learning experience?
I mean, I think that when you get to the data portion of that, the answer maybe on a surface level is no, like I can have my learning experience with this thing, but I think that there's ways that the data is being used that perhaps down the line we'll realize that like, oh, maybe it wasn't such a good thing. And I don't know the problems well enough to be able to fully articulate what that potentially could be. But I do know that there's immense amount of data being collected, so much money going into education and these technology portals and how they relate to Web3 and the blockchain. So that's definitely something I'm keeping my eye on. It's also why I worry about the scale part of the equation, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I wonder, like, okay, if we're talking about honoring this learning experience, like how much can you really scale that, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
seems like the further away that or like the mission gets from that mission statement, like some things just seem to have a more limited scale. I mean, that's why for me next year, my son will be going to like a homeschooling situation. Like I'm not doing
Mm-hmm.
it 100% from home, but it's a co-op. It's on a farm. There's no technology. We might offer like a content creation class, but like in the
Mm-hmm.
regular day, there's no technology. Everything would just be like paper, pen,
Mm-hmm.
projects, things like that. So that's sort of my vision, and I would hope that the scale would come in the fact that I'm sharing with people what I'm doing, and then you can go out and you can do that on your own. More of like a
Mm-hmm.
decentralized thing, which like I guess that's like what they talk about in the blockchain, but I'm not so sure. Like when you say like decentralized, but also it's centralized and it's like super transparent, but also it's very private. And I'm like, how can you have all those things? But so yeah, I definitely need to learn more about that back end and the data portion of things to like complete my hypothesis there. But it's definitely something I worry about just as much as, the classroom experience is like where's all the data going? How is it going to impact the future of our children?
Yeah, in another thing too, and this is probably one of the recurring themes that we've really talked about from a lot of different perspectives during this dialogue. This has just been a great dialogue. Is has anyone, and I say anyone, meaning really just society, have we helped each other take technology and integrate technology into our lives so that we don't miss honoring interactions with human beings? Because there are some people and they're great with technology, but their interactions with others are not really that great. And so again, there you have that piece where it's like, oh yeah, this person is really great with technology, and they're all the way over here on this side, right? And then you have somebody who's like, oh okay, well they're really great with people, but they're not really great with technology at all. So then from my perspective, I ask the question, really just a rhetorical question, right? And it's one I ask myself too. Well, is it possible? Is it feasible for this person to be really good or to have some level of prowess with technology and then also really be good with human relationships and human interactions? So it doesn't
Balance?
have to be,
Looking
so
for
it doesn't have to
balance
be,
in life?
so yeah, so it doesn't have to be because, it, and again, not trying to be esoteric by no means. I'm just a regular average guy. But I ask these questions quite often, which is, are we in a situation in life where we're seeing things as being mutually exclusive when maybe we can see things as mutually existing?
Boom. I like it. Yeah, a
Yeah.
tweet that I remember from a while ago was, "What happened to all the hacky sack boys?"
Ah,
Right?
I had one of those. I
Yeah,
had one
right.
of
Because
those,
people didn't
folks.
used to have cell phones to sit around and stare at, so they used to bring a little hacky
I
sack to the
had one,
wedding,
and that
like
was my favorite, the hacky
I
sack. Yeah.
know, and I feel like we are missing out on those types of things not even just as pertaining to K to 12 education, but as humanity generally speaking. I think that we do need to find some better balance here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's been what, 15 years really since these cell phones in the form that they are with the screens and the data and all that have taken off. So we're like, as a society in our teenage years here this with the cell phones, and I'm hopeful that we'll get better at that balance, figure out what the proper way is for children to interact with technology. And I mean, the K to 12 schools have a lot of problems generally speaking, but I think that if we were to take on this technology one, because I do know that in the background of schools and the funding and all the programming and stuff like that, it's ed tech is one of the largest industries. So if we can kind of look more into that, I think that we can take at the same time tackle a lot of these other issues in our schools that are more surface level, and they keep us fighting on these surface level issues, not to get to the beast of the matter. So that was
Yeah. So
what I was
I'll
thinking about.
I'll share this real quick with your audience. Something to think about again, right? If we ask the right questions, we can get the right answers, right? That's kind of the
Oh,
premise.
yes.
Is we're talking about technology, but you know what we've really talked about the whole time, like the whole time, but we really haven't called it by what it is, by its name, and it's simply this: it's social emotional learning. And sometimes, again, people are really great with the technology. Sometimes they're really great with the SEL, social emotional learning, but I don't necessarily know that we collectively as a society, as human beings, not just in education, but collectively as a society, I don't necessarily know that at the same time that we're talking about technology, that we're also too in a commensurate fashion, we're talking about social emotional learning. We're talking about talking to other people and having conversations with other people without devices. I know some people, and they have a rule: when they sit down at the dinner table, no devices.
Right. And
That's that social emotional learning piece. Yeah,
right.
go
You're
ahead.
calling it social emotional learning, but you know, a lot of the social emotional learning that's in schools, I feel like that's like of a different vein than sort of the like you're talking just more about like being a human
Yeah,
and like soft
yeah.
skills, I would say, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
different than what a lot of people, especially my audience, might think when they hear social emotional learning. So I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted
So
to differentiate.
broader context for them was social emotional learning. And one of the things I want to add is this very quickly. One of the things that I think we all have an opportunity to do is to look at terms and concepts as we've seen them before, and then ask ourselves, is there a broader meaning or understanding that I can have for this? That maybe without that, I would be a little bit myopic in my view of things.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I think though, like the school districts use it in a very specific way,
Mm-hmm.
especially like on the policy and curriculum side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like we might use it more generally, like just like social intelligence or
Mm-hmm.
what is it called? Like how personable you are with people. Um, emotional
EQ,
intelligence.
emotional intelligence,
Yeah, there
EQ.
you go.
That's correct. Which is one
So
of the things that top qualities that corporations and companies are looking for, especially multinational, international companies these days. They're looking for people with, a significant capacity in emotional intelligence or EQ, and you can't get emotional intelligence or EQ by being on a device 24 hours a day. Like you can't, or however many hours, obviously, whenever you're not sleeping, you can't, you can't,
what about what days are you in? I need
right,
questions. So you get one
right,
extra hour, man.
right. Or, so you can't get that from a device. And I think that that's one of the reasons why, to kind of go back in time, why so many people had such a tough time, and all of us did really collectively as a society. We had such a tough time during the pandemic because we had this technology and we were doing all of these things, leveraging all of this technology, but we didn't have that piece of interacting with other human beings and other people And you had this technology, and you really had this absence of emotional intelligence, or things that we were doing on a daily basis during the lockdown to really enhance that emotional intelligence. So I think when I go back and I think about the pandemic, I think about how we did have a lot of technology. We had all of those different things in place, but we didn't have that ability to just have conversations with
Right.
each other. I remember going to the gym, and the gym that I was going to at the time, it was kind of interesting. You had to sign up for a gym time. Okay. And when you went to work out at the gym time, it was 30 minutes exactly. Not 31 minutes, not 32 minutes. It was 30 minutes exactly. And they ushered everyone out of the building so they could clean all of the equipment and desanitize
That
and
was
or
for your
sanitize.
safety, Vernon. You should be
Yes.
grateful.
You're
You
right.
were
And to
stressful there.
sanitize and do all of that, and to clean so they could bring in another group like an hour later. And I think about those situations because we do want to be safe. We do want to be cautious. We want to be all of those things. But is there a world, is there a place, is there an opportunity for us to be those things, but then also to concurrently to have that ability to interact with each other as human beings? Because I've often said this, each person, I believe, really has what I call a dual identity. So they have an identity as a human being, which is your individual identity, and then you have a collective identity, which is really your identity as part of a group. So, for instance, if you said, "Hey, we're going to go ahead and get together with people that are either current or former New Yorkers," I couldn't be in that group. That's not my
No,
group.
especially
That's
not
not
with
my
that
collective
cowboy hat.
identity.
People be like, "No, not a New York boy."
Right?
Oh, we do have one cowboy. We got that naked cowboy. So you might have to you might have to, like, lose a few clothes. But, no, but definitely, I and just, like, the whole time was super stressful on top of that. So,
Hmm.
that definitely added to it. But, as one dimensional or as flattening of reality that the screen and this technology can tend towards, I would say, if there's not proper balance. I would say when there is proper balance, it can be a dynamic force in your life, and our friendship, relationship, everything that we do is proof of that, right?
Hmm.
Met through Instagram, see each other's journey, support each other, engage in wonderful dialogue every now and then in this format. And there can be really positive things that come from it if you know how to use it. It has the proper place in your life, and you're honoring that experience. And it
Yeah.
has been quite an honor to be on here with you this past hour or so. Where can people find you? What stuff do you got coming up? Shout out all your stuff.
Yeah. So, of course, always an honor to be here with you, with your great audience here in the listening space. I am at sign the right leader on the socials, and simply go to therightleader.com and you'll find all my content.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll get those linked up in the description down below for people for nice, easy access. And yes, always an honor, a blessing. And thank you so much. We'll have to do it again sometime. Check in, keep me updated on what's happened down there in the K to 12 space. I'll let you know what's going on in the homeschooling world. And to everybody out there, make sure you've hit that like button. Make sure you share this out with your friends, subscribe to the channel, all that good YouTube stuff. And until next time, think free, live free, give all the glory to God.